بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ميم ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون إن الذين كفروا سواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Brothers and sisters in Iman, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The 7 verses I've just read are from Surah Al-Baqarah. And before I go into translating them, just to remind you that the subject is globalization and its effect on society. Al-Baqarah takes a 12th of the whole Quran. And Al-Baqarah talks about this subject at a great length when it mentions things to do with the Jews, when it mentions things like I've just recited, trying to tell the people that this is a book about which there is no doubt. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. A guidance for those conscious of Allah. Muttaqin, those who are conscious. الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. Those who believe in the unseen establish prayer and spend out of what we have provided for them. والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون. And those who believe in what has been revealed to you, O Muhammad, and what was revealed before you, and of the hereafter, they are certain in faith. أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون. Those are upon right guidance from their Lord, and it is those who are the successful. Talking about globalization, like I said from the first day I started these lectures, is talking about a very crucial issue, as different scholars have given different meanings to the word globalization. But I had promised yesterday that I'm going a little bit deeper into this subject. And today I'm coming forward to talk about the New World Order. Some of you might ask yourselves, what is the New World Order? Well, there is a very good book written by someone known as Ralph Epperson. Epperson is Epperson. Now, I would like to sort of analyze Ralph Epperson. I would like to start by quoting certain pages from the introduction in his book. Then I'll build on that introduction and expound on it vis-a-vis the subject. I quote, he starts his introduction by these words: "Something is wrong in America." Today's newspapers are full of stories about the rampant rise in divorce, or if you like, divorce rates, the increasing abuse of children by some parents, increases in the incidence of rape, pornography being read by an increasing number of people, more crimes against property, demands for world government, urgings for national borders to fall, Christian churches being closed because they will not seek licensing by the state, etc. This is the opening of Ralph Epperson's introduction in his book entitled The New World Order. He goes on, but why are these things happening? Why are all of the legacies of the past, the family, national borders, the right to practice any chosen religion, the right to private property, amongst other things, under such attack? Is it possible that there are actually people and organizations who really want to change the basic order of things? Clues to the answers to these questions can be gleaned from some comments made by people and organizations that are talking about these wide-reaching changes in the nature of our lifestyle. Now I start quoting. An Associated Press dispatch on July 26, 1968 reported, New York Governor Nelson A. Rockefeller says as president he would work toward international creation of a new world order. On January 30th, 1976, a new document called the Declaration of Independence was introduced to the American people. It was signed by 32 senators and 92 representatives in Washington, D.C., and read in part, 2 centuries ago, our forefathers brought forth a new nation. Now we must join with others to bring forth a new world order. Another individual who has commented is Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State. According to the Seattle Post intelligence of April 18, 1975, Mr. Kissinger said, our nation is uniquely endowed to play a creative and decisive role in the new order, which is taking form around us. President George Bush gave the commencement address at Texas A&M University on May 12, 1989, and he used similar words as well. His speech was on the subject of Soviet-American relations, and he was quoted as saying, in part, "Ultimately, our objective is to welcome the Soviet Union back into the world order." Perhaps the world order of the future will truly be a family of nations. Historian Walter Mills maintained that prior to World War I, Colonel Edward Mandelhouse, the major advisor to Woodrow Wilson, the president at that time, had a hidden motive for involving America in the war. The historian wrote the colonel's sole justification for preparing such a batch of blood for his countrymen was his hope of establishing a new world order for peace and security. Now, let me remind you a little bit of why am I quoting this book. Among the books that I've come across on the subject of the New World Order, Ralph Epperson's book comes close to what is real and what is really going on Earth or around the globe at this particular moment. In this book, which I would advise some of you who can get hold of it, even on the internet, it's free, you can download it. The New World Order by A. Ralph Epperson. He talks about very many things. Talks about the seal, Nuevo Ordo Seclorum, the New World Order, the Great Seal of the United States. And then he goes on, in the context, he talks about tomorrow's rulers. Very precise. And then there's the New Age movement. This is a very catchy phrase. New Age movement, and there's the New Age religion. He explains at great length about Luciferian society. He talks about the secret societies. Most dangerous among them is the skulls and bones. These secret societies come from 13 bloodlines. These 13 bloodlines are the 12th plus the 13th tribe among the so-called Ashkenazi Jews. But there are some things that we need to go back and check whether how we've been talking about these things are correct. For example, when the Quran is talking about the Jews, the question that comes in is it these Jews or the Falasha Jews? When the Quran talks about Ashab al-Fil, is this the Ashkenazi Jews or is it the Falasha Jews? Falasha Jews are from Ethiopia. These are the guys who ruled Yemen. And if so, who are these Jews we talk about now? These are converts. Now, Ralph Epperson talks about their sinister motives, strategy, and plans to change world religions, conquer them first, and change them and come to the New Age religion, which is a Luciferian religion. That's why, apart from analyzing about who are the real Jews, then we have to come and analyze what's the difference between Jews and Zionists for us to be on the right cause, for us to be doing the objective of Qawlan Sadida, talking about something but hitting the bullseye. Why? Because يُصْلِحْ لَكُمْ أَعْمَالَكُمْ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ وَمَنْ يُطِعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. Brothers and sisters, this subject is too heavy. Subject of globalization is talking about a body, an organization that's already taking care of issues around the globe. We're talking about the United Nations. We're talking about WHO. We're talking about FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization. We're talking about the World Bank, the IMF, World Trade Organization, International Labour Organization. Now, these are universal organizations. These universal organizations are being funded by people who are filthy rich. They've established institutes to think on behalf of these organizations, to guide these organizations. And they've gone a step further. And I would like you to note down this say: silent weapons for quiet wars. Sounds simple, but please think about it. Digest and exhaust the meaning of that wording, silent weapons for quiet wars. This is a war against hearts and minds. No more bullets, no more bombs. Only when necessary. I mentioned to you about weather warfare. I don't know if you've done some research, you've written on Google weather warfare and then put PDF and download that file and see what they're saying about by 2025, how can they be using the weather against the enemy? Ralph Epperson talks about these things, but if you want to see what's coming because of these things, you need to go back to Agenda 21, Sustainable Development Goals, United Nations. What is Agenda 21? An environmental program to save the earth, or a plan for global control? What is Agenda 21? Is it an environmental program to save the earth, or a plan for global control? For the benefit of those who find UN Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 difficult to comprehend, let me try to explain to you, make an attempt to give you a better understanding of it. One is forgiven for being confused or overwhelmed by this subject as it has been deliberately conflated in the past 30 years. It has been conflated in the past 30 years to lull you into believing that it is a harmless green policy to create a utopian future, free from price-based economy and out of control, rampant capitalism and consumerism. If only that were true from research in reading United Nations Agenda 21, the Global Diversity Assessment and the various Club of Rome reports that preceded them, one comes to the conclusion that it is a plan for global governance. There's a difference nowadays of phrases. There is global government and there is global governance. Now, those who are well knowledgeable about globalism, they know that the right word to use is governance, not government. Presidents become like CEOs of organizations. Club of Rome is another organization. One who understands this comes to a conclusion that it is a plan for global governance and re-engineering of human society that has little to do with preserving inalienable human rights and freedoms, and how humanity has become the enemy in the eyes of those who endeavor to control. You need to keep quiet when these things are being strategized and planned, and if you talk, then you become public enemy number one. So what is to be done if that is the case, Tambul? Remember, a day or two ago, I mentioned the issue of organizing ourselves, setting standards to inform the masses of what is to be done, why we must unite and forget about small issues that divide us, be they religious, ethnic, color, regional, or whatever. There is relevance and importance that people come together. And no one has that privilege and that opportunity better than the Muslims. إنما المؤمنون إخوة. The Quran says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Question still arises, are we conscious of Allah? Because this is a guidance, book of guidance for those who are conscious. Why have we killed our institutions, which are masjids? Why is it that you might go to any masjid and ask the imam for statistics, 5 meters circumference, 10 meters circumference, and he or she doesn't have that. Any leader who guides the masses in any mosque, can they give you statistics of how many people are poor, how many are widows, how many are disabled or physically challenged, etc.? How many masjids are strategizing and planning for the society in general or at large? Now, when you read Ralph Epperson's book, The New World Order, you'd be able to understand what I'm trying to bring up on this topic. Ralph Epperson talks about the New World Order. But the way he talks about it, he mentions quotations from very prominent personalities whom we can't ignore. He mentions dates and year when these quotations were spoken. It's for us now to go back and check whether it's true or not. For example, he mentions Adolf Hitler, a socialist, and the head of the German government prior to and during that nation's involvement in World War II, whom he quotes as saying, National Socialism will use its own revolution for the establishing of a new world order. He confided to Hermann Röschning, the president of the Danzig Senate, National Socialism is more than a religion. It is the will to create Superman. How many of you have heard about transhumanism? The making of cyborgs. Sometimes when I want to talk about these things, there's a tendency in my thinking, I tend to think that, no, Stambuli, this is too early for these things. People are not prepared for such lectures. Maybe if you would wait for 10, 20 years more to come, maybe that generation would understand what you're talking about. But what pushes me to talk about these things is that, no, these things 50 years back, things are happening. Weather warfare has been there with us. People just don't know. We always think that whenever the weather changes, it's Allah who changes it. But these guys have gone a step ahead. They're using satellites and creating havocs. Tsunamis and earthquakes and all this is man-made now. And I'm not saying this just to please you guys. I'm saying this and I can prove through authentic documentation that these guys are saying this. It's not me. It's not my late father. It's not anyone I know. Scientists, big people who've researched and done this. There is a place called Gakona in Alaska. There is a station called HAP. It's H full stop A full stop A full stop R full stop P full stop. Write HAP project and see what's coming on the internet. These are antennas. How many are they? What can HAP do? I said, write down geoengineering. Write down chemtrails. See what information you get. What are chemtrails? This is how far these people have gone. And they're planning for the new world order. It's a new global government. Now, what they're coming with, gradualistic, is governance first. Let them think or assume they are ruling themselves. But we know where we would pin them down. That's why they bring things like sustainable development goals. IMF and the World Bank would come in and say structural adjustment programs. What is structural adjustment program? Privatize public property. Privatize public services. If it's electricity, if it's water, please privatize this so we get investors who come in and invest in your country. This is globalization. What they're looking for is cheap labor. They'd open up special economic zones for you, but for their own benefit. Open up export processing zones where labor is cheap here than doing it in their own country. And they'd call this quote-unquote development. They industrialize your country. They send investors here from their country. They use your labor. You sort of make 60 jeans, trousers. 2 trousers can pay your monthly salary, while the 58 is theirs. When you privatize water, at whose mercy are you living now? We talked about endocrine hormone disruptors. Can they use water to disrupt your hormones? Can they use medicine, pharmaceuticals to disrupt your hormones? Can they use food to disrupt your hormones? Can they use beverages to disrupt your hormones? How safe are we? How safe are we? How organized are we? Organized in the sense that we have our own laboratories to check out for these things. Can be used in preservatives, in colorings, in sweeteners. How many of you have heard about a chemical known phthalates? It's known as phthalates. It's P-T-H-A-L-A-T-E-S. Phthalates, pronounced phthalates. It's a chemical put into plasticware, cups, bottles for baby milk and all this. Please go into the internet, research on phthalates. I'll talk about it in due course, but just to give you a hint of what's coming, phthalates. What it does to hormones, what it does to small babies, because you use those bottles to put hot milk in them and give it to your baby. Now, the New World Order is where we're going. That's why there's the European Union, the African Union. This is gradualistic. There's ASEAN. These are regional organizations. And from AU, we have SADC, we have East African Community, we have ECOWAS, and so on and so forth. They are preparing us to be living as a group of people. They are herding us together. like sheep. Who's behind all this? It's the 13 tribes. The 13 tribes who are the Illuminati, who are the bloodlines, who are the guys who are at the top with money. Banking fraternity belongs to them. They own central banks in Europe, in America, and all these big countries. They fund things like United Nations. They own pharmaceutical fraternity, oil, gas. That's why they make people fight in Yemen. It's not because of anything. It's not about madhahib. It's not about anything. It's about resources. They did this to India. British East India Company. Read history. Check what they did to India. And how they were taking resources from India to go and manufacture in Europe. That's the British in UK. And send it back to India for Indians not to afford to buy. They did the same to East Africa. British East Africa, it's a sister company to British East India. We were doing a program today at IBN, and we were talking about globalization and its effect on society. So I was explaining to the presenter what was transpiring up here. Most people don't even know. Before even Tanganyika became Tanganyika, under the borders that were drawn at the Berlin Conference, there were U.S. embassy. There was a U.S. embassy in Zanzibar. There was a British embassy in Zanzibar, 1840. U.S. embassy is 1833. 1844, French embassy in Zanzibar. They were doing business with Said Said and Barghash, selling ivories, selling slaves together. Then the bishops come around and draw for us pictures of slavery, like Arabs did this just to counter Islam. What they forgot is Vasco da Gama did worse, but they don't mention it in school. For 200 years consecutively, on the same East African coast, took people to Brazil, to Goa in India, and many other places as slaves. Some of them just put them off the dhows to be eaten by sharks on their way. And it's written in books published in East Africa. Look for a book called The Portuguese Period in East Africa. That's a book by Justus Strandes, published by Kenya Literature Bureau. I told you, read what they did at Songomnara, what they did at Kilwa Kiswan. 200 years consecutively. What the Portuguese did to the Muslim community along the coastline, not even Hitler did to the Jews. What I talk to you is, why should you be made to feel like second-class citizen when there's enough historical evidence that Arabs, Asians, Persians, and Chinese were doing trade with this part of the world for 2,000 years. 2,000 years. AD 45, AD 60. Periplus of the Eritrean Sea. Read it and see who are doing business with the coastal Africans of the East African coast. How come someone comes around and makes you feel like you are a second-class citizen? You need his consent to be a citizen of this nation. How? I'm telling you this because I read history and I know. I'm talking the same things in Kenya. The same things are happening to Asians, Arabs in Kenya. But most of them are surprised, are shocked when they hear me talking about this. And I can prove. Let me give you an example. AD 45, AD 60, periplus of the Eritrean Sea. 4th century, Greco-Roman known as Ptolemy writes about the geography of this area, and he mentions these communities. 7th, 8th century, Islam comes in before it goes to Medina. 10th century, Hassan bin Ali from Persia with his kids lives some at Mogadishu, Barawa, Mombasa, Lamu, Malindi. Then he comes to Kilwa and lives in Kilwa. 10th century, 975 AD. 11th, 12th, 13th century comes Al-Idrisi, Al-Masudi, Al-Maqrizi. These are historians and geographers from the Arab Peninsula. Talks about these places and whom they met in these places, doing business. 14th century, 1331, Muhammad bin Abdullah, famously known as Ibn Battuta, comes to these areas and mentions how civilized these people were. 15th century, 80 before the Portuguese, the Chinese come in here. He's called Chang Ho, but others call him Ma Ho. And Ma in Chinese means Muhammad, which means the Chinese were Muslims. Some of them died in a place called Shanga in Pate Island, Lamu. And they were buried in an Islamic way of burying. I visited the spot and I said, why is this like this? Why are the graves like this? Says they are all Muslims. Then I go deeper into researching about Chang Ho. 6 generations before him were Muslims, his own family, and Al-Hajj, including him. Chang Ho was a Muslim, and an Al-Hajj, been to Mecca several times. Then came Vasco da Gama, 1497. Now let me ask you a question. When Vasco da Gama couldn't reach India, where did he get the pilot from? Wasn't it Malindi in Kenya before it became Kenya? Now, let me refresh your minds. If I may ask, then what is globalization? Isn't that globalization? Weren't we globalized before the Europeans? I've mentioned and I'm repeating again, which is the first world? Is it Europe or the East African coast, Middle East, Persia, and the Far East? Which is the first world? So we belong to the first world when they were barbarians. We ruled over them. That's why the papal bull that gave consent to Spain and Portugal to invade these areas and kill us if we reject to become Christian or we reject being Christianized. That's why the 200 years brutality by the Portuguese on the indigenous people of the coastal area of the East African coast. Now, can the Portuguese pay if we ever seek for compensation? repatriation? Can they give us back the heads they took after slaughtering our rulers? So when we talk about globalization and its effect on society, we go way back to the 15th century. We were living very peacefully. We were doing business among ourselves. The East African coast, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, and the Far East. Before the Mzungu came and invaded us by Papal Bull consent. The Pope gives them consent that go and invade these areas. Christopher Columbus goes to Europe and America, Vasco da Gama and Bartholomew Diaz comes to East African coast and the Gulf area. Question that I have for you guys who are listening to me, I'm very glad that you attend these lectures on a daily basis. May Allah bless us all. How long will it take us to awaken our minds, hearts, and souls in order to please Allah and be Muslims? Because Allah says in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. Kabura maktan inda Allah an taqulu ma la taf'alun. Why do you say what you don't do? Why do we say we are Muslims and we don't do Islam? It annoys Allah very much to say what you don't do. And you can't talk Islam without practicing it. So when we say we are Muslims, let's do Islam. And Islam is an organized religion. That's why it was just above everything else. Why has it been taken as if it doesn't exist no more? And why do we as Muslims take Islam as just an ethnic group, like being a Khoja or a Swahili or a Zaramo or whatever? Why? What does it take for us to talk and do Islam? Because if we don't do Islam, globalization would step over our heads and finish us and make us look like robots. It's high time we sit together, discuss issues pertaining to our society and where the world is going. We need to research and keep for reference purposes for the future generations to come and know, like, no, there was a generation that was awake, that knew what time it was, that knew what is happening on earth, and they set the record straight. This is what we need to do. We need to set the record straight. Brothers and sisters in Islam, let me stop here as my time is up. Inshallah, pray for one another. We get another chance to meet tomorrow. If I ever said anything that annoys you, I'm sorry. If I said anything that pleases you and pleases Allah, please let's pray for one another so that we get an opportunity. We meet again tomorrow and discuss further issues on globalization and its effect on society. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.